everybody. So this is the first in our new program note series from King Nonprofit Solutions. And if you don't know what that is, and why would you? Because it's the first one. It's basically something I came up with where I'm going to start hopefully doing interviews with people in the nonprofit arts field. So executive directors, operations directors, anybody who's on the front lines of doing this work in the nonprofit arts sector. So this is the first one of many. If you're watching this and you don't know who I am, I'm Ashley Kane. I am the founder and CEO of King Nonprofit Solutions. So I do grant writing, web development, and digital marketing for arts nonprofits. And the first program notes series interview is going to be with my good friend, Alek Peugh, who is the executive director of the Idaho Falls Symphony Orchestra. We're going to tell you a little bit about her in just a minute. But first, I want to give you the backstory on how this kind of came to be and give you a little context for this interview, because I think it's going to be a really good one, and it's a pretty interesting story. So as I said, Alek and I have been friends for a really long time. We used to work together, in fact, so we talk pretty frequently. And Alek has been to a series of events in recent years where they've kind of, it's all been arts nonprofit focused, but they've kind of gone off the rails a little bit on talking on some subjects where afterwards Alek found herself pretty frustrated and a little just dissatisfied with the content and with the way the conversations went. So things around millennials and how they affect the future of orchestra and the industry itself, how the future of orchestra is kind of played out and how they see that happening versus how it could go. And so we kind of got into this conversation about it and said, well, that's ridiculous. You know, what about this? What about that? We started brainstorming and we kind of went off on a rant. In fact, I believe I used the words, "Thank you for coming to my TED Talk." And Alek said, "You should do that." And I said, what if we did an interview? And I thought it was a pretty good idea to actually talk to those of you in the field, attending events, doing this stuff in the office every day, on stage, in the art galleries, who are really on the front lines of this, and get your opinions. Because it's one thing for a keynote speaker at a conference to tell you something. It's another thing for a consultant like me to tell you something, but we should be hearing from you. What do you think? What do you want to see in the industry? Where do you want the arts to go in the years ahead? So Alek is going to help us kick off this series by talking about that a little bit. So we will be talking about millennials, audience engagement, and the future of orchestra. And to get us started, I'm going to have Alek tell you all just a little bit about herself and what she does.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I am really excited about this because, as you said, I've been to some things recently, professional development, where I was really discouraged by some things I was hearing and just worried for the future of my field and orchestras in general. So part of why that is my background is actually, I wanted to be a music teacher. I had no idea that arts administration was really a career path. It wasn't something that was, mentioned much in school. I had no idea that there were people who do things to make orchestra performances happen, even though logically I should have known that. It's just not something I thought of. But so I really, my background is in education, and even before that it was band. I was not an orchestra person, but I'm very passionate about music and what it can do to help people learn. So I love the field, love orchestras. It's just not where I saw myself when I got a degree in music education. But so, as I mentioned, going places I didn't expect. I am now living in Idaho, having been born in Oklahoma, but spent most of my life in Ohio. This job in Idaho sort of popped up at the right time and dragged me across the country, and I absolutely love it. So much like my job as an arts administrator, love where I live, love what I do. So the orchestra that I work with in Idaho is a Group 7 in the League of American Orchestras, which means that we're on the smaller end for a budget. The Group 7 cap, I believe, cuts off at $500,000, and that's for the artistic budget. That does not include the supporting budget. So basically that doesn't include me or my staff or, renting the office or things like that. It's all about putting on the concerts. If that budget is under $500,000, then you're in a Group 7. And as an executive director, I do all of the things except for making the music happen directly.
Oh gosh. So your average small arts nonprofit executive director. I think probably a lot of people are feeling you on that one. So how long have you actually been involved?
Yes,
You said you wanted to be a music teacher, but I'm guessing that you've been involved long before you went to school for that.
Sure. So there's a bit of a family tradition with my family. My great-grandfather sits all of us down and teaches us how to play the clarinet as soon as we're big enough that our fingers can cover the holes. And for me, I was 8 years old. I was in 3rd grade and finally got to take a crack at playing that clarinet that I saw sitting in the living room. And from there, it was just immediate love. I loved the thing. I couldn't stop practicing. I was really close with him, and so it was a fun bonding opportunity. So I've been studying music in a performing capacity since I was about 8. Yeah, so it's been a minute. But I mean, even before that, I'm not a good singer, but I've always loved to do it. My mother had to play music for me when I was young and needed to go to sleep. It's just been a part of my life, my whole life.
Probably a lot of people can relate to that too. I think most of us who end up in music have been doing it for a long time. And you know, it's funny. I mean, I got involved in music because my brother-in-law gave me a trumpet to annoy my parents with. My sister is much older than me, so I had a brother-in-law at a really young age, and he gave me this super loud instrument, this trumpet, to annoy my parents with. They didn't really get along, and it kind of backfired because I loved it. I am the only musician in my family, so there was nobody else in it that could really push me towards that. But fun fact that you'll appreciate, originally, I wanted to play the clarinet. But I never got the chance because somebody gave me a trumpet. So anyway, just
happens.
Yeah, it's a little bit about that, but I think most of us end up at a really young age kind of getting involved. Okay, so, I just got a note that my connection is unstable. Uh-oh. Okay, I think we're good. Sorry. All right, so on that note, this might be kind of a redundant question. I'll ask you to go a little bit more in depth, but why do you care so much about orchestral music in particular? And why did you choose to work in the nonprofit world instead of maybe on the for-profit side, either in schools, which isn't technically for-profit, but you know what I mean, or even in a music store or as a working musician?
Sure. So to start, the first half of that question, why do I love orchestral music? It's not, I love all music. It's not specifically that I'm really, really passionate about orchestral music. I love it. I definitely have favorites that get me, really excited when we program it. But it's not so much about the particular genre of music. I would be just as happy working with a wind band as I would with an orchestra. However, as far as going into the nonprofit sector versus the for-profit sector, I did work in for-profit kind of for a while. I worked for a music store facilitating private lessons, and I did that for about 2 years, and I loved it. It was great work. But this, really helps me reach so many more people. I think that orchestras are the most visible, sort of familiar option to access art music for most people. And so we go from, at the music store, I was seeing between 200 and 300 people a month, where here at one event alone, I'm facilitating music for 800 to 1,600 people. And so being able to see that huge difference in who I can reach and who I can help experience music is just more easily done in a nonprofit.
Yeah, I think that's what draws a lot of us to it, is just kind of seeing the transformation that it can make in a lot of people. I know that was the case for me when I was working in nonprofit orchestras. And by the way, side note, so she brought up that she likes other types of music, that she loves all music, and she mentioned that she worked at a music store. Well, I can vouch for the fact that she loves all music, because there is somewhere floating around a video of Taylor Swift Shake It Off on ukulele. And it's fantastic. Maybe if I can get her permission, I'll dig it up. No promises. But it's really, really great. Sorry, Alek, I just had to bring it up.
That's okay. That's what YouTube's great for.
Yes, it is. All right, so more on that later, maybe. All right, so let's talk audience engagement and millennials. So basically, you might love them, you might hate them, but younger audiences are really affecting concert attendance, and they're kind of affecting how nonprofits are marketing their events, what they're doing for audience engagement, what they're doing as far as like fundraising and things like that. They're sort of affecting all of the nonprofit arts world, right? And a lot of people have very strong reactions to them. So how do you think millennials are changing the way nonprofit orchestras approach what they do?
Okay, so for this, I have it split up into sort of three main points, but I want to preface this by saying that I am not going to talk about millennials and their money, because that's the thing that people always talk about. And the only thing I will say about that is, friends in the older generation, think about how much expendable income you had when you were in your 20s. It probably wasn't enough to be making considerable donations to orchestras. And that's the end of the money conversation with millennials, because that's been hashed so much, and I don't want to talk about it. But so what I do want to talk about, the 3 points are time and empathy and a need for connection. And then the final point is instant gratification. So for time, millennials have so many more options available to us for entertainment than most of our grandparents did when they were our age. And it's just, we can go to any number of concerts on any day, or we can go watch a movie, we can sit at home. We just have so many entertainment options, and a lot of them are available immediately wherever we are, whenever we want it. And so because of that, we know that we have these options. And so if something makes us unhappy, we don't have to stick with it. We don't have to go to an orchestra if we feel that there are people in the audience who don't want us to be there. We'll just go to a movie, or go to a Taylor Swift concert, or we'll just do something else, because we have the options available to us and we know about them. Right. Because of technology and because of social media and our connectivity. It's not the way it used to be, where what you did on a Saturday night was you went to the orchestra and you saw everybody you were going to see at church on Sunday. That's just not the world we live in anymore. Right. And so what orchestras need to do is understand that you're competing for entertainment time, not even just money. It's not about the cost of ticket sales. It's about the quality of the event, and it's about the environment that you're creating when you're there. So if there are staff members or board members or really long-term patrons who are very outspoken, who aren't happy that we're there, maybe because we're not dressed up, or because we have a glass of wine or two with us when we go in, and they don't like that because it's not traditional, we feel that and we don't want to be there, so we don't go. And so orchestras need to be really attuned to that and careful about the way that they react to millennials when they're in a room. So that's time. The next thing is empathy, which I sort of touched on a little, before Generation Z, these teenagers who are doing wonderful, crazy things for the environment and for, social reform and things like that. Before they, hit 18 and everybody realized what they were doing, millennials were the most empathetic generation so far. They were the ones who were the most connected in the world, and know what's going on, not only across the world, but in other communities in our country. And we care a lot about it. We're really bothered by things like what's happening in Flint, Michigan, and things like that. We're very attuned to that. And we crave knowledge about that and the connection that comes with it. And so that goes back to my point about, if we're not wanted in a room, we know it. We know when people don't want us around, and we're not going to go. It's just not, we're not going to bother. And so it's really, really frustrating for me being in these, sessions that we touched on, and every time somebody says millennial, somebody pops off with a comment about it, and it's like, great, you don't want me to be here? I'll go somewhere else where they do want me. And that, I think, is something that a lot of millennials feel. So yeah, we're very empathetic, and we feel that, and we're looking for those kinds of things. The last thing is instant gratification. which is something that people tend to talk about with millennials, but they tend to put sort of a negative spin on it and say that we're, lazy and we don't want to track down information. But the thing is, right here, I have everything I could possibly need, or I can find it right here in my hand. And it's always like it was right here. It's never that far from me. And that's just been my life. That's what, the generations before me developed it. So that's what I was given as a teenager, is the ability to pick up a supercomputer and figure out absolutely anything I could want with a Google search immediately. I don't have to go to a library and wait 2 weeks for somebody to pull a book. And because of that, orchestras need to be on their game with their websites, which I know you help with.
Yes, thank you.
Of course, yeah. They need to be on their game, not only with just, having a website that looks good on a laptop or a computer, but has information on it that people want. It doesn't do me any good to go to your website and not be able to find anything and not see anything. And if I can't find the information, I'm going to go to the next website that has it. And that's probably going to be, if I'm looking for a concert to go to, you have one shot to get me, and if you lose it, I'm going to the next website, and I'm going with another organization's production if I can find the info. So there's a lot rolled up in that. It's having a good website, it's having a good marketing team who knows how to write about what you're doing, and it's picking good things to do so that they can write well about it so that people want to go, which is a really huge thing to get into, but orchestras really need to do it.
Yeah. Hey, so this wasn't technically on the list of topics that we said we were going to talk about. So I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here.
Great.
But yeah, sorry. But you were talking about some things that I think are really, really important. So you mentioned that millennials and the younger generations in general really have a lot more interconnectivity. We can look up information at our fingertips at any given moment. We are used to that. We are comfortable with that. There's a sense of interconnectedness and community with that too. So it's not just that you can look up any piece of information or fact, but you can also get a variety of perspectives on that information and fact. So there's a whole community, not even necessarily of people that you know, but just people out there giving this perspective. And when you take a really, really traditional medium like orchestra and bump it up against generations that expect instant information, that sense of community, the technological aspect, and all that comes with that, it can be kind of a culture shock, not least of all for the older generations that really want that traditional medium to stay traditional. So what do you think is maybe not the answer to that, but how do you think you marry, this medium that people kind of want to see in its historical place, and also make it inviting and make that environment welcoming to a generation that, number one, doesn't necessarily feel totally welcome, and number two, is looking for that sense of interconnectedness and community around orchestra?
That's a really good question.
Sorry. Like I said, I know it's a bit of a curveball, so I'm not looking for you to have this super polished answer, but I mean,
Sure.
More like, do you think it's possible to marry those two things, or are they just oil and water?
Yeah, I think that's the root of what I've been struggling with recently, where
You and everybody else.
right, but especially like me as a young person working in this field, if it is oil and water, why am I working? Like, why? I think it is not oil and water, but I do think that it's whatever the next step down from that, like, inability to mix is, because there is an ability, but it's going to take someone incredibly brilliant and innovative to figure out how to do it, because the traditional way of going to an orchestra doesn't work with the way that people are now. We don't sit for 2 hours and do nothing but look straight ahead and do nothing. That just doesn't work. Our world is too fast paced. Most workers drive themselves crazy if they take a 15-minute break, because we've all been brainwashed into thinking if we're not being productive that we're not worth anything. And so I think that sitting at a concert and just trying to enjoy something takes a level of sort of just sitting back that a lot of young people don't have, because
It's a
we're
skill.
sitting there, it is, and it's not something that we're really trained to do.
I
I
know.
mean, we take time tests from the time we're in third grade. You've got 2 hours to answer 600 questions, and if you don't do it, your school's going to lose money and you're going to fail, and you're going to, you know, all these really high stakes things have been dumped on us since we were kids. So to sit and appreciate music, which is an art form that takes time, is not something that's inherent in what we do. I love music, but I struggle to listen to 2 hours of music now, unless it's background music that I can listen to while I'm working. But even that is not accepted in the traditional orchestra, where, you know, I'm listening to an orchestra. I hear what is happening on the stage, but I'm checking my email because I have to work to feel okay.
I mean, in essence, I'm kind of thinking, like, off what you're saying, that in some ways, the only people that are really well suited to sit in an orchestra concert for 2 hours are the people that have been musicians at some point and are basically trained for that, or have been in some kind of activity or work that is similar, that asks them to just sit and absorb and pay attention for that time period. But then that excludes all these other people that we want to expose to the art form, but have not been set up to absorb it.
Yes, and I think that orchestras have a lot of great education and outreach programs to try to facilitate those things, but they're so focused on kids that we're not teaching adults how to appreciate music either, and they need it just as much as their kids do.
That's a great point.
I do a lot of instrument petting zoos, as you know, but it's something that I love to do, because it helps a kid, you know, hold a trombone and then hear a trombone rocket in a Mahler symphony. Like, that connection is amazing, and that's what makes me appreciate orchestras. I didn't come up through orchestras. I came up through band, but I play the clarinet, and so when I hear something very technical or beautiful, I appreciate it in a different way. And so I try to make that happen for kids through petting zoos, but at every petting zoo, there's some parent who tells me, oh, you know, I used to play that and I dropped it. I'm like, well, here, try it again. Just take the thing. You'll be surprised that you remember. And every parent shoots me down.
I forgot to mute my phone. Hold on 1 second.
No problem.
Let me see if that works.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It should stop ringing any second here.
This can be where you can put the Taylor Swift video.
Okay, I think we're done.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all good. But so I try to, you know, give these parents an instrument they told me they used to play in 5th grade and they've since dropped, and every single one shoots me down. I've had maybe 2 parents in the entire 5+ years I've been facilitating petting zoos who actually take the thing and give it a try. Wow. And I think that lack of connection is a big issue. To get them to appreciate music, they just, you know, sit there and hear something and they don't really know what's going on. They might like a measure or like a phrase, but as far as having that same connection to, I held a trombone, I put it on my mouth and I made it happen, and now that player is up there crushing that solo, that connection doesn't happen for adults. And so they don't care. They didn't get anything out of being there, except for that their kid had a good time, which I know is extremely valuable, but that doesn't encourage that parent to get a babysitter next month and come to our concert that's not for kids.
Right. So we're talking about a lot of high-level concepts of what the disconnect is between the orchestral medium and a lot of its audiences. So, you know, you mentioned the environment and timing and things like that not really lining up for millennials, but also some of the just the inherent issues with orchestral music, asking people to sit, and maybe reaching kids early with that, but not necessarily their parents or people who are past a certain age who didn't experience it first. So it kind of begs the question, on a practical level, what do you think orchestras should be doing to better engage audiences and younger audiences, not necessarily kids, but just not our parents' generation in particular?
Sure. So with that, I think what needs to be done is that, first of all, orchestras need to have the conversation, especially in boardrooms, about the way that people feel about young people being there, and reminding them that when you have a very empathetic group of people in a room, even if you think you're internalizing the way that you feel, we probably know about it. So they need to have conversations about the issues that they have about young people being there. What is the behavior that bothers them so much? Why is it happening? And how do we accept it as part of it, or establish some kind of compromise that makes the young people still feel welcome, but doesn't, annoy the subscriber of 25 years who had to, worry that they were going to spill their wine on them because they brought it into the hall with them. And so we need to have the conversations to make that out in the open, instead of it just being this quiet, why did that lady give me a cold shoulder? Why did that happen? If we have the conversation and we understand, we can address it. So that's the first thing that needs to happen, and that starts in the boardroom, because your board members are supposed to be your advocates, and they're supposed to be your, staple people in the audience who know the orchestra really intimately and are setting a tone.
Yeah,
And
they're
so
kind of ambassadors.
Right, exactly. Thank you. They're ambassadors. And so if they are not only just welcoming to everybody who's there, regardless of their age or who they are, if they're welcoming and they encourage their friends to be the same, then that will start to spread. And I think it also goes the other way of saying, sitting there and letting it happen and being complacent is just as bad as doing it yourself. If you see somebody making another audience member uncomfortable, and you were a board member who's an ambassador of this organization, and it is your fiduciary responsibility to make sure that it's around in 10 years, you need to say something quietly, privately, aside to that patron and talk to them and start the same dialogue that happened in the boardroom to say, well, what was it about that bothered you, and how can we fix it as an organization? And the answer is not tell the young people they can't have their wine and beer while they're listening to the concert, because
Yes.
they're not going to go if you tell them that. So
right, it's created a whole other set of issues.
yes. So it's a matter of, I think, training and taking a really hard look at yourself, and then, spreading that out is really what it boils down to.
Well, and on that note, I want to kind of back up to the first thing you said. So you were talking about how important it is for board members to really set the tone and take an active role in talking about issues and things like that. So what about the role of staff and board itself? Do you see millennials as valuable contributors to the nonprofit art sector in those roles? Or do you just see them as youngins who have a lot to learn from their elders and maybe could be in these positions but need to kind of like shut up and do it the way it's been done?
Well, being that I am a millennial on a staff, I obviously think that we're valuable, and that we bring a unique perspective to things. But I think most importantly, between the staff and the board, an orchestra needs to represent the community that they're serving. And millennials are now a huge percentage of the population, the working population, actively contributing to a community. So if you have a board that doesn't have anybody under the age of 40, your community should not have anybody under the age of 40. And I know that's not the case. And the same with staff. I know staff is a little bit more difficult because you need people who have certain skill sets. And especially when you're in a small orchestra like this, the skill sets they need are extremely broad and unrelated.
They're all over the place.
It's all over the place. So that can make it really difficult, and I get that. But I still think that orchestras need to be more representative of their communities, and that people are doing a good job with gender, making sure that they have a equal representation of men and women on their board. Not a lot of boards have a lot of people of color on them that I've seen. That could be the case outside of the couple boards I've seen, but
oh no, it's pretty widespread. I've written about that. It's a whole thing. in the arts.
Yeah, what I've gathered is that your typical board member is either nearing retirement or already retired. They're probably white. They're probably, what the board member looks like.
Yeah.
That's not what communities look like.
No.
Communities are, very diverse. They're very vibrant. And I think that boards and staffs that don't reflect that are not getting the perspectives that they need.
So how do you draw these people in, though? Like, how do you draw in a more diverse constituency in age, in race, in all these demographics, so that you have people informing your work that aren't just saying, let's keep it the way it's always been?
Right. So I'm not entirely sure what the answer to that is, mostly because all of my roles have not been able to influence what actually happens on the board. As a staff member, I am beholden to them, and so I don't really get to influence it much. I can give my thoughts, and fortunately my board right now is incredibly receptive to what I think, which is really unique, and I appreciate that so much about them, that they're really interested in what I know, either from my job before or from things I've been to, but they listen. And so what I think it is that we really need to look at, in addition to how the orchestra functions, how a board functions, because the traditional board is not something that a millennial or maybe even a Gen Xer has time or resources for. So, I don't get much fulfillment participating in an organization, and that participation being that I go once a month and sit in a room and listen to the update.
Right.
I don't want to do that. I don't think I would get anything from that. However, what I do get something from is somebody tells me, oh yeah, they have this event on a Saturday morning. They need volunteers to go out and do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, oh, I can do X, Y, Z for a few hours on a Saturday because I'm free. I'll go do that. And that sort of volunteerism is the kind of thing that a lot of younger people prefer. They don't want to sit around and make decisions. They want to physically do things and get the instant gratification of seeing the fruits of what they've done. And so I think that boards need to have a more active, hands-on role in an orchestra. I think that just the traditional sitting in committee meetings or sitting in board meetings, while incredibly needed and useful and appreciated, is not enough. We need board members who are at events, who are talking to people, who are maybe board members who like to read a stage plot and throw around chairs and stands. I mean, where I am, we don't have a big stage crew. I would love if a board member wanted to come and actually see that part of it. And I'm sure that there are young people who are hungry for that knowledge about, well, how do they know where to put everything? Here, come read a plot. I'll show you how we do this. And I think that sort of experience is the kind of thing that makes a young person feel not only like they have really significantly helped, but also builds that connection where I didn't hold the trombone, but I did set up that row. And so I know what the chart looks like, and I understand why things are laid out that way. And so you're building a connection in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point too, about what necessarily younger generations want to get out of participation as a volunteer, as a board member or something like that, as opposed to what past generations maybe were looking for. Now, this is a generalization. I'm about to probably tick off like half of my older audience, but again, it's a generalization. I'm aware. But I think there was a tendency in decades past, in generations past, to get on a board and maybe not look for that to be a real involved thing, but something that you could put on your resume and tell people, I do this, I'm connected. And it was more of like a networking thing almost than it was to actually get in and get your hands dirty and find out what that organization was about and make a difference. But I think that that's a total departure, like you said, from what younger generations are looking for, because, not that millennials are perfect or that any of the younger generations are perfect. No generations are. And we could even get into why, like, even talking about generations is kind of a dumb thing, but that's neither here nor there. Times change, people change. And I think that a lot of the younger people out there, and again, as Alex said, we're talking about those that are already in the workforce. We're not talking about kids and teenagers here necessarily. We're talking about people that a lot of times we have a tendency to think of as teenagers, but they're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, they're approaching middle age. That's who we're talking about. But these younger generations, they do want to make a difference by the very nature of this more connected world where information is at your fingertips and you have built and fostered a community of perspectives and ideas. People do want to see more of an impact. They want to see that they're making a difference. They don't just want to sit in a boardroom and network and make connections that look great on LinkedIn. That's not a thing for our generation. Our generation is, show me what I can do with it. And I think we've got to reach out to that. And here's the thing, right? Like, there is a tendency among some of the older generations in the arts world, in the orchestral world in particular, that like to really poo-poo these younger generations. But here's the thing, it should be a natural marriage, because I just used the word impact twice in reference to what younger generations actually want from this work, whether it's on the staff side or it's from the volunteer side or the board side or anything else. They want to make an impact or to help make an impact. And that should be a natural thing that pairs well with nonprofit work of any type. So we should be welcoming that influence in and that drive to make an impact. That's just my soapbox. Again, thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Right.
About that.
You hit it exactly. That's totally right. That we want to do things where we can see the benefit for ourselves. We're not doing it to, that's not entirely true. Millennials do have the vanity of Instagram right there where we can say like, oh, look at this thing that I did. But it's not because we want to throw it on a resume only. We want to feel good about it. It's a twofold thing, which I know is the same for older generations. I'm not saying they don't feel that way. They want the warm and fuzzies just as much as they want to have the connection to everybody else at the table. But I think that for them, making the connection was done in person. They made their connections by going to church, and they made their connections by being on boards. And here I can pick this thing up and I can talk to anybody in anywhere in the world and have a connection. I mean, I regularly talk to people in England, and I don't have to be in a room with them. And I think that it sounds amazing to say it, but it's not anymore. It's really not. And that's the way that we grew up. So we don't need to be in a meeting to connect and have great networking for our job. That's not the world anymore. So we don't want that from a board. We want to do things directly to help. We don't care who sits at the table with us.
Right. And, I almost feel like I should back up and I should give a concession to my older, more mature friends who might be watching this too, because I mean, it's certainly not just people that are older than millennials either. Like, I have friends that I went to high school or college with that, I grew up with and knew as musicians who are very much invested in the medium staying traditional because that's what they know, that's what they like, and they want to see it kind of have its so-called integrity preserved. Sure. So it's not even just one generation thing. There's a variety and a whole spectrum of opinions on it. But, I think there's room for everybody personally. And I do think that we could capitalize on, and again, it's a generalization, but this drive for hoping to have influence and impact and wanting to be involved instead of it just being like this thing you get to say you do that's very surface level. And that could be, on any side of it. It can be as a patron, they want to be more connected, so they need things that are targeted to that. But it can also be, as you said, like a board member. I mean, even like this is a great example of what we're doing right here. You and I are having an interview on opposite sides of the country right now. And if you found somebody who was representative of what you do and what you're trying to do, who wasn't necessarily, 5 minutes from your door, why couldn't you use technology like we are right now to involve them? And I'm using you as a guinea pig here, but I mean, anybody, any organization, take advantage. Hopefully boards are representative of the community and they're of the community, but I'm not just talking about boards either. I mean, there is more opportunity in today's world for connectivity for community, for involving people who are not able to walk into your hall or walk into your boardroom and be present physically. Let's involve them all. And instead of necessarily saying that it all has to be traditional, look for ways to integrate the traditional and the new. And sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but I think you'll appreciate this. Yeah. So, like we all know, those of us in the orchestral world, I'm going to explain this a little bit for any of you that aren't or maybe don't even really have any experience with orchestral music. But when you go to an orchestral concert, there's typically movements to a piece, and the etiquette is that you don't clap in between. You wait for the whole thing to be over. And inevitably, there will be somebody who doesn't know that. Either they've come to watch their kid in a concert, or it's their first orchestra concert. They don't know that etiquette. So, first movement ends and they're out there like, yay! And they get dirty looks from everybody in the audience, right? Okay, and I'm bringing this up because we think that etiquette is like traditional orchestral etiquette and that it goes way back and that we need to keep it. But see, Alek's nodding nope, because it's not true. Now, at some point, somebody decided that, but back in the days when a lot of these composers were actually alive and they were in the concert hall during these performances, either conducting or watching or whatever, they wanted people to clap, not even just in between movements, but when a musician would run off a crazy trill. Like think of a rock concert and the drummer goes off on a crazy solo and people are like, yeah, woo! Same thing. I'm a little biased, but a trumpeter, manages this crazy riff in the middle of an orchestral concert. It used to be encouraged for people to kind of go nuts and support that musician. And somewhere along the way, we've decided that that's not proper. And I guess all of that to say that we have created some traditions that were never meant to be traditions. And that breaking that down a little bit to be more informal and to be more participatory inside of the actual concert is not such a bad thing. And it would make people feel like they don't have to come in a ball gown and sit still and be quiet as a church mouse for 2 hours, because it was never meant to be that way. Sorry, I got on my soapbox.
Okay. No, I have a thought on that. And I think that a really great way to address this is programming composers who are alive and will come to your hall.
Yeah.
When I was in Nashville this last month for the League conference, they performed a work by, I think his name is Jonathan Leshnoff, and forgive me, don't put that in there until I can verify that. But he was in the room, and so was Joan Tower, and they did her fanfare for the Uncommon Woman. And having the composer in the hall after those two pieces, which were not the end of the concert, every single person was up and cheering and screaming because the composer was right there. So they had a connection and they felt safe expressing their appreciation for what they heard because they could see the composer sitting up there in a box instead of being in a box in the ground. Like, it's just, the connection is so much deeper when it's with someone who's right there in the room with you. And I know there are 40, 50, 60 players on the stage who just did it up there, but there's still, no matter what we do, there's a fourth wall. And so that doesn't, you can put the trombone in the kid's hand, they got the connection, but there's something different, and it's much easier to just program a piece by a composer who will come to your hall. And there are a lot of young, hungry composers right now who would do that, probably just for the coverage of their expenses, which is not to say that I think we shouldn't pay composers, because we should. But for the orchestras who have small budgets and are worried about that, there are thirsty composers out there who want their work played, who will come to your hall and happily listen to your audience lose their crap because they're so excited about what they heard, and the guy who wrote it, or girl who wrote it, is right there.
Right.
So that's a big push that I would love to see orchestras make that would help. I mean, I'm going to keep going on a tangent. So I recently, when I came back from that conference, I had met all of these young composers who went to the League. And so I was, checking them out on Twitter and trying to figure out what they sound like, because for me, I want to know, like, okay, you write music now, but who influenced you? What kind of sound are you going for, so that I can keep that in mind when my music director is programming things and he needs another 15, 20-minute piece. I can say, oh, I know this one by this 25-year-old who lives in Cal. Like, I know these people. So I've really gotten into composer Twitter recently.
Composer Twitter. Who would think that's a thing?
Right? But it's fascinating. They are brilliant and hilarious, and I love interacting with them. And they're really welcoming to me just being like, I was open. I was like, I'm an arts administrator. I have a small budget. I can't probably hire a lot of you, but I want to get to know you. I want to talk to you. And it's been delightful. And I think that there would be a lot of people in my generation who would do the same thing. So if we were programming, the key example for me is Patricia Walinga, who's this recent college graduate, composes, is on Twitter, and she's hilarious, and she has a lot of followers. And so imagine if, someone who happened to cross one of her viral tweets knows she's playing in a concert, or know we're playing a piece of hers at a concert, and be like, oh wait, I know her from Twitter, that's crazy. And they're going to go and have a connection that they wouldn't otherwise have. Right. And then after the concert, they can talk to her on Twitter about what they thought. And it's just, that's the kind of connectivity that millennials look for. But I just asked orchestras to program a 25-year-old woman who nobody really knows about yet. And I don't see that happening. Just
No, I mean, it's pretty scarce in this industry so far, but maybe that will be a change that could be made. And there's lots of opportunity to make changes that involve younger generations, that still involve the traditions and the pieces of orchestra that everyone has grown to love, no matter what their age is. There's room for all of it, I think. But like you said, the hard discussions have to be had to talk about, what is your bias against any particular idea or group of people? And does it belong here? Is it helping? Is it hurting? Which really brings us to talking about the future of orchestra itself, because we've talked about millennials, and we've talked about, older generations, and we've talked about different ideas to bring people in and audience engagement. But, with all of that, we're still in the very early stages of trying to figure out how these elements can fit together. So where do you see the future of orchestral music heading, and, are nonprofits today ready for it?
So I think that a very big, very promising step is happening in 2019, 2020, because this is the year that everybody yelled loud enough that almost every orchestra is doing some kind of feature of women, which is great. That's a huge step. I love it. I'm thrilled for it. We're doing it. We have 6 season concerts, and one entire concert is entirely female composers and soloists. Yay! And also we do a chamber concert series, and there are 2 concerts in that. And the one that we're doing in the same month as that all women's concert will also be all women. So we have 50% of our chamber concerts are female composers, and 1/6 of our concerts are all female composers, which is a huge step for orchestras. And I appreciate it and I love it. But what I'm really, really, really worried about is when the rep lists for 2020, 2021 come out, and I'm really afraid for a lot of orchestras who did it this year and go, we did it, we're good, look at us, we're done. And then they go back to, yeah, it's over. Now we can go back to Beethoven and Mahler and Brahms and all the dead European guys you could want. And that, I think that if that happens, a lot of orchestras are going to die because of it. I think that the world right now is really in touch with things that are out of touch. And so the flash in the pan, get the attention while it's the hot topic way of being gets people raked over the coals now. I mean, a prime example outside of the arts world is we just got out of the month of June, and I saw so many montages of people who sat on corporate social media accounts and watched July 1st, 1201, how many logos dropped the rainbow and went right back to stuff as normal. And then 2 days later had all their patriotism up, red, white, and blue everywhere. And their commitment to pride that they were screaming about the entire month of June was nowhere to be found. And I mean, it's everywhere. There are so many videos that people have made that are on Twitter and Facebook trashing these companies because they do what's hot for the minute it's hot and then go to the next thing, and they're not sticking to anything. They're not driven by a mission to be connected and serving their community. They're driven by money and what's hot at the moment, and that's not, the millennials aren't having that. I know for a fact Gen Z is definitely not having it.
No, you can't treat that stuff like a trend. You need to own it and continue to walk that walk.
Yeah.
I mean, not that you have to harp on one topic every day. There's too many to even do that, but you have to walk the walk every day.
Yeah. Yes. And so what I think needs to happen is, and what I'm going to push for as much as I can is, what's the percentage this year that we're doing? And I had it, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But what's the percentage of not dead white dude music that we're doing? Next year, we can't go lower than that. We will never go lower than that, which I know can be really scary, and it's definitely not entirely my place, given that I'm not the music director, but it is my place as the person running the organization to make sure that we're not just following trends, that we are establishing a good mission. And fortunately, I'm very blessed. My music director is super collaborative and open to that.
That was my next question. I was going to ask, how are your music director and your board taking?
Yeah. So, like I just said, I'm super lucky. They're very receptive. Idaho is not a more liberal state, but I've got some people here who are really open to new ideas, and they back us up when we try to do things. But the other side of that is that it's on me to collect the data to show them that this was worth it. So I have to be able to show them at the end of next year, here's how these concerts performed, here's what we did differently, and here's what worked and what didn't. And we have to make data-driven decisions that are not responding to a trend.
Oh, girl. Sorry. I just love data, and I love anything data-driven, and I'm constantly harping on that. I could kiss you.
Yeah, please don't. No, but and there's a big push in the field overall, which I think is what will save us. So the people who get on board, the orchestras who get on board with data-driven decision-making are the ones who are going to make it, because those are the people who are listening to what people do in a measurable way, instead of just listening to whatever board member or 25-year donor who yells the loudest about parking issues or seating issues or whatever. Instead of only listening to that, looking at who bought tickets, when they bought tickets, why they bought tickets, how they bought tickets, and making decisions based on that, those are the folks who are going to make it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. So, going into the future, what are some of the biggest issues that you see facing the nonprofit orchestral world, both today and that we can kind of see carrying over?
Mm-hmm. So the biggest issue is a phrase that I think you used earlier in this, and it's, we've always done it this way. And that is like the nail in the coffin. Whenever I hear that in a meeting, it makes my skin crawl, because we can't live that way. Looking back at how things were done is not the way to do it, because the world is changing and it is progressing and it is going forward. So you cannot do things the way you have always done it and expected things to get better. I think there's something about that being the definition of insanity, that you do the same thing over and over expecting a new outcome. And that's not the way anything works. So I think that, that the old guard mentality is the biggest issue that faces orchestras. We've got to be flexible. We've got to be willing to try new things. And I think that small orchestras especially are the most equipped to do that. Even though we don't have funding and staff and all of our workers are really tired, we also have a month between concerts. So we can try something, analyze the data over the month, and figure out if we want to try it again, or what we want to alter, or what we want to drop. We've got time, instead of you put on a concert Friday and Saturday and then you go right into rehearsal for the next set. There's no time to analyze what you've done and make decisions. Where here, I've got at least 2 weeks of downtime between we just wrapped up this concert, the next set doesn't start for a few weeks. So I've got some time to look at what we did, how it did, what do we want to try. And so I think that that's a responsibility that smaller nonprofits need to take on, even though I know telling a small nonprofit to take something on is the worst thing I could do, but it makes your job easier, and it makes it feel less like you're just working nonstop and there's no change, and you're just producing concert after concert, and maybe it sells well, maybe it doesn't. This gives you a purpose and goals that you can be shooting to achieve, and that having a data-driven purpose will help you get young people, because we want to see concrete things about what is happening. And so if you can say, we set a goal to have 25% of our music next year not dead white dudes, and you meet it, then you go, great. So we met it this year. Next year, our goal is 30%. And you'll have people who will buy in. They may not care at all about orchestral music, and they maybe never will, because as we've said, it's sort of if you're not trained, if you're not in love with it, it's kind of hard to be. But people do love a goal, and they love to see goals achieved. And
Right.
so they will stick with you because of that, if you have a good goal.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about it making your job easier if you're kind of using these data-driven strategies to inform what you're doing is totally true. And it's true with anything. Again, this is my soapbox a little bit, but it ties in exactly to what you're saying. With smaller orchestras, it may seem easy for Alek and I to sit here and tell any of the smaller nonprofits out there, orchestral or not, like, you should do this, this, and this, and this. And you're sitting there thinking, but I already do 10 million things. But here's the thing, whether you're talking about analyzing for audience engagement trends, or you're talking about evaluation practices for writing grants, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you spend a little bit of time on the front end to get organized, and to put in place some methods that will allow you to collect data, to analyze data. And a lot of that can even be automated to some extent. So it doesn't have to be hard unless you make it that way. But if you do the work on the front end to do that, it makes everything you do later easier and less time consuming. And I'm saying that as somebody who's done it. And I know Alek has too, as somebody who has sat in that office thinking about what needed to happen for the organization to hit whatever goals or strategic aims that it had, and thinking, how am I going to do this? I don't have enough time. Like, I get it. Alek gets it. But, if you put in the work to set up systems to collect data and to analyze that data, then you are not sitting there thinking like, well, what do we do now? You know what to do. You have the answers right in front of you for what needs to happen to get more butts in those seats, and to keep them coming, and to engage them as volunteers, as board members, as orchestra members, as, whatever your organization itself needs. You have the answer right in front of you. It's very, very clear when you've done the work to collect the data, to organize it, to have a track record over years to do this, which takes some setup and some time, obviously, but it makes everyone's job easier, including the board, including yours, including everyone connected in any way with that organization. Plus, you will be much better prospect to grant makers, to donors, to people who you are asking to get involved with that organization, because you can show track records of hitting goals, of engaging people, of that organization doing what it was meant to do and making smart decisions. So that's just my little soapbox rant about, what you were saying about that. All right. So last question. Are there things unique to smaller orchestras, aside from this like data collection thing that we just talked about, but unique to these smaller orchestras that you'd like to highlight that would help them to engage with audiences and to kind of break through this barrier of thinking that the younger generations are going to destroy them?
So we touched on it a little bit, just saying that smaller orchestras are more flexible, which seems counterintuitive because we have less money and fewer people trying to achieve the same sorts of missions. But with it being fewer events and we're just a little more nimble. We don't have I mean, my orchestra's going into its 70th year, so we've got a fair bit of history, but it's not like we've got this huge name like the Cleveland Orchestra is doing this crazy wackadoodle thing, and like that would shake up the whole world. But if the Idaho Falls Symphony tries to do this thing, Idaho Falls will know about it, maybe Boise or somebody around, but it's not this huge, like the entire world goes, what are they doing? I'm going to watch every detail of this and watch for the first time they trip. People don't, smaller orchestras have this sort of anonymity, which gives you the ability to try things. Just try it, and then when you do the thing that's right, then you're going to explode and everybody's going to want to know what you did, which only spells good things. So I think that not only are they nimble enough to take chances, they're also invisible enough on the grand scale of things to try lots of things without the fear of failure, breaking them, really. I mean, if one of the big guys tries to do something and it crashes and burns, all their people might jump ship because this huge banner name tried to do a thing and it didn't work. Right. If we try to do a thing and it doesn't work, we say, hey, we tried a thing, it didn't work, sorry, but we're back to the status quo, and please keep your subscriptions. And it's really easy for us to save face because not that many people were looking, which is sort of unfortunate to say, but it's the truth. And then another thing that I wanted to point out, which is kind of in line with this, but also sort of goes back to what we were talking about before. Smaller orchestras, I understand, have their fixed budgets. We have a fixed line for how much we can spend on music. And so we do these, Beethoven concerts, or we do Brahms or whatever, because we've got the music in the library, so there's no rental cost. The parts are already bowed, probably by our concertmaster, because we just did it. So there's time saved there. The orchestra knows it because we just did it, so you don't have to have that many rehearsals. So the money that you save, commission new works, or hire the 25-year-old graduate from college who will come to your concert and sit there because you've saved thousands of dollars by programming another Beethoven concert. There you are helping that young person, and you're enticing people by saying, we're doing this, and it's not, you're offsetting the cost. So you can't say you can't afford it when you're doing all these shows that are concerts that are pieces that you have sitting in your library. And it's just, that's what I hope to see. And I know there's been a lot of dialogue about that, this is a Beethoven year, great. So you're saving a ton of money doing pieces you've already done, do new works too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point too. Like the smaller nonprofits that are in your space in the arts sector really, can afford to be braver in their choices because they can be nimble and they can pivot when they need to. And, they've got kind of a smaller constituency to explain things to and build that community rather than trying to please everyone, which frankly never
gonna happen
out well. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, I don't want this to get a whole lot longer. For those who have stuck with us through the end of this video, thank you very much. I hope that you've gotten a ton out of it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. First and foremost, thank you, Alek, for doing this interview and being my very first program notes series guinea pig. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you haven't checked her out yet, definitely go and check out the Idaho Falls Symphony Orchestra page. If you're in the area, please support them, both by coming to concerts or donating, or hey, volunteer, get on their board, because clearly Alek's looking for you. And if you're not in the area, just check them out. They're a great organization to support, and Alek is fantastic at what she does. And as far as this video goes, hopefully I will have more from the program note series coming to you. If you're watching this and you are a staff or board member of any sort of arts nonprofit, get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you and hear about what you're passionate about so that I can interview you on a future episode of Program Notes. And in the meantime, if you liked this video, please feel free to like it, share it, send it out to all your friends, and leave me a comment. I would love to hear from everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.